Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Al Dollar with Grizzard Communications Group, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. I'd like to start by saying thank you for making time in your busy schedules to join us for this very special presentation. In just a moment, Lori Connolly will be presenting Grizzard DonorGraphics Media Use Benchmark Study, a snapshot of current communication trends to ignite your fundraising. For those nonprofits looking to ignite their digital fundraising, this study is sure to be enlightening for you. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items which will enhance the webinar presentation experience for each of you. First, to optimize our sound and audio quality, all attendees are muted during this session. Second, we encourage everyone to type your questions in the dialog box and submit them to us. We are scheduled for 45 minutes, and so we will answer as many of your questions as time allows at the end of Lori's presentation. Don't worry. If we don't get to yours today, all questions will be answered and a consolidated summary will be sent to each of you via the email you provided during registration. Depending on the number of questions, this may take a couple of weeks. In the meantime, be sure you subscribe to and check the Grizzard.com blog in the coming weeks for answers as well. Next, we hope you'll participate in the polls during today's webinar. These polls pertain to specific information presented during Lori's presentation. Finally, please note that your GoToWebinar dialog box will minimize by default after a few minutes. Simply click the arrow in the orange box located at the upper right-hand side of your screen and the dialog box will expand open. Now, if you haven't already done so, please stow your carry-on luggage underneath the seat in front of you or in your overhead bed. Fasten your seatbelt and also make sure your seat back and folding trays are in their full upright position. At this time, I'd like to introduce Lori Connolly. Lori is Vice President of Research and Analytics with Grizzard. A native to Denver, Colorado, most people are surprised that this statistician has never been skiing. Instead, she prefers to collect bicycles, her favorites being her mountain bike and cruiser. Lori has over 16 years of experience in multi-channel marketing analysis and optimization through quantitative techniques and research insights. She has worked with clients including Samsung, Disney, AARP, and Dell. Impressively, Lori has managed the longest-running digital media usage and attitudes tracking study in the industry. She has presented for the DMA, eMetrics, and has participated in several webinars, authored numerous white papers and articles, and has received industry recognition including awards from AdTech, IAC, and NCDM. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Lori Connolly.
Thank you, Al. And I just want to say that earlier Al was poking fun at my long title. So Al, I'd just like to point out that the best research tends to have the longest titles. And I might be a little bit biased there. But actually I'm very happy that you're all joining us today. I'm really excited about sharing this research study. It's a very recent study that has just been released. And so you guys are one of the first to see the findings. So this presentation is a hybrid of actionable insights to improve your fundraising program, along with some interesting communication trends that I think that we can all relate to personally. So thinking back a few years to a time when we weren't connected 24/7 to a gadget that was always by our side, I think that communication has really changed drastically due to mobile phones. And they've changed communications not just in the obvious sense of it being a mobile device and anywhere we are, but because our mobile phones are so ingrained to our lives. We currently use smartphones to check work and personal email. We use the maps to navigate, to find out where we're going. We use the apps or applications to find the best restaurants nearby. We give and we get instant updates via text messages, and some of us even connect socially in at least a virtual sense through check-ins and status updates, posts, and tweets. So for a device to do so much, it's not surprising that nearly half of the U.S. population currently has a smartphone. Smartphones debuted only in the early 2000s commercially, so in approximately 10 years' time, they're slated to reach 50% penetration. And for comparison purposes, it took the standard plain old telephone 70 years to reach 50% penetration of U.S. households. So smartphones on track to have 50% penetration in just 10 years. Standard telephones, 70 years for 50% penetration of U.S. households. So why is the digital landscape interesting? I think because we all live it and we understand it. And why is it actionable for us as marketers? Because as we'll see in a few minutes here, it has some direct implications for fundraisers. We'll be reviewing some of these implications throughout the presentation whenever you see this light bulb icon. So that's kind of the culmination of the research insights so that we can kind of do a check-in along the way as opposed to just sit through 45 minutes of stats and kind of be left to wondering at the end, how am I going to incorporate this into my fundraising program? We are going to also be conducting a few live polls, as Al mentioned, during the webinar so that you can see how your media use compares to that of the U.S. overall. And because this is a professional mix of fundraisers in this webinar, I'd expect there to be some differences. And those differences are very key because we're going to be talking about how to get beyond and dig deeper than those averages. One of my favorite quotes about statistics is this one. Say you were standing with 1 foot in the oven and 1 foot in an ice bucket. According to the percentage people, you should be perfectly comfortable. And I think that we all get that averages can hide a lot. So we're going to be going beyond the averages into relevant demographic differences that are prevalent in digital media adoption. And again, how that's going to be affected by our fundraising programs. So let's get started with an overview of the study. DonorGraphics is a nationally representative study measuring digital usage for the U.S. population ages 18 and over. A subset of this study is with the population who are active donors. They are defined as those who have given a donation to a charitable organization outside of a local church or house of worship in the past 12 months. And these active donors have given through any channel, offline or online. 56% of the U.S. falls into this category, shown in red in the pie graph. And we also surveyed a subset of the digital prospects, or 14% of the population, who have either opted in to an email program from a charitable organization, they perhaps like them on Facebook, or they follow them on Twitter. We call those guys digital prospects. And they may not have made a financial donation in the past year, but they may have volunteered their time. So you can see those guys represented in blue, the 14%. And then the remainder of the U.S. online composition here that you can see in the pie is the 31% called the remaining general population. All right, now we're going to look at why the digital landscape is relevant to fundraising across multiple channels, going around the globe clockwise here, looking at email, social media, mobile phones, and tablets. So when we compare donors and digital prospects to the remaining general population, we see a much higher percentage of email subscriptions from companies and nonprofit organizations than we do the general population. So what that means is we're going to be talking about email subscriptions here for a little bit, and what I'm referring to is opt-in or permission email. We all get these email indicators and alerts. Maybe it's from our bank, maybe it's from Amazon.com, maybe we have opted in to nonprofit organizations' emails. These email subscriptions are talking about that whole view of opt-in or permission email. So again, 81% more email subscriptions for those donors in the United States who have given a donation in the past 12 months to a charitable organization. Nearly the same for the digital prospects. Again, those people who have opted in to receive email, they like a charitable organization on Facebook, maybe they follow them on Twitter. The prospects haven't given a financial donation in the past 10 years, but again, they may have donated their time as well. So we see them as a very applicable portion of our population that we're looking at. Continuing down through social media use, donors have just a tad bit higher of social media use. So those people who have given a donation to a charitable organization in the past 12-month period have a 6% higher usage of social media sites, including Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Digital prospects are actually 16% higher. Looking at smartphone penetration, donors actually have a 17% higher penetration. Digital prospects, just about the same at 20%. And tablets. This is a big one here, and definitely correlates to some of the demographics that we'll be talking about in a minute. Donors have a 65% higher instance of owning a tablet PC, such as an Apple iPad. Digital prospects, about 17%. Looking at each of these four categories in the same order, starting with email. Email's use is fundamentally shifting over time, both not only in how it is being used, but who is using it. Overall, we know that about 90% of those online subscribe or opt in to permission email from companies or nonprofit organizations of interest. But this is one of the areas that the average is hiding a story. So when we look at the usage by age here, we can see a few things. We can see that email subscriptions actually peak in the 50 to 65 age category. And the average across all age groups is that column on the right-hand side, the total for the U.S. population at 26 email subscriptions. So what this means and what this is showing us is that of the entire online U.S. population, the average number of email subscriptions that a person has currently is 26. That means 26 different organizations send me email or permission email. So looking at the left-hand side with the lower age demographics, the 18 to 29, they only have 15.6 email subscriptions. So when you contrast that to the 50 to 64 age category at the top there, you can see that it's less than half. And over the past few years, there's been a lot of research and speculation and talking about why the younger generations, particularly teens, which are not part of this study, but teens in general, we know, don't receive or opt into a lot of email. They do use other methods of communication, which translates to their lack of opt-in email engagement. Older generations, however, are still heavily engaged with email, which translates well for fundraising, since in general, giving does correlate positively with age. That means the older the person is, the more likely they are to donate. Continuing on to social media. Overall, a whopping 82% of U.S. online adults use Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube at least monthly. Those are the most popular of the social media sites, although, as I'm sure you're aware, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of social media sites out there, and some of them are just gaining traction and popularity nearly overnight. Pinterest is one of those. Again, we know that use varies widely by age. Social media is an area where it started out, of course, Facebook's genesis was starting as a social network platform for colleges and college students. And of course, then we saw just huge discrepancies in age, whereas the 18 to 29 crowd had usage similar to what you see here in this graph on the left-hand side, but the older populations they hadn't heard of it, there was no usage, etc. We know in the last 3 to 5 years there have been incredible advances in the penetration in these older age groups. So particularly those over 50, they have just flooded to Facebook in recent years. And you can really see that on the chart on the left-hand side. Those bars there representing Facebook penetration and use by age. You can see that, yeah, there's some differences from the left-hand dark burgundy, which represents the younger generations, and then going further to the right there representing older populations. There's really not that large of a difference compared to what we saw a few years ago. So amazing traction being made there in the penetration and usage of Facebook. Twitter has basically stayed pretty much constant throughout the last few years. It's kind of maximized its penetration, and we'll talk about some different demographics in a second there with it. And then YouTube, there is a larger discrepancy for sure. This is more akin to the distribution that we would have seen a few years ago with Facebook and MySpace before that. So we also also know that social media varies by gender. Not as much as it does by age, but you can see here with the males in the burgundy columns and the females in the blue, you can see a lot of differences. What this is telling us is that females are more likely to be on Facebook and males are more likely to be on Twitter and YouTube. Looking at some mobile stats, we're going to talk about SMS, also known as text messaging. Overall, 23% of U.S. online adults have opted in to receive text messages from companies or organizations. This is opt-in mobile communications. And we see definitely some differences by age again here. And one thing of note for this study and for all media studies of this variety, there is still a large difference in digital adoption as it relates to texting by age. So you see on that right-hand side of this graph, the age group of 65 and older, they only have a 4% instance of opting in to commercial text messages or organizational text messages. And that is very much akin to how their adoption of the texting technology works overall. So they really have very, very little texting behaviors as it relates to either personal behaviors or commercial or organizational, as we're looking at here. You can see that progressive decline there as we get into the older demographics, going from the left side to the right side. So in the 18 to 29 group on the left, 31%, or nearly a third of them, have opted in to commercial or organizational text messages. In looking at gender, males and females have the same rate of opting in to text messages or SMS messaging, but females overall are more positive about the experience. So 39% of females rate the experience positively, whereas only 29% of males rate it the same. Looking at smartphone penetration, we mentioned earlier on the call that for all U.S. adults, about 48% currently have a smartphone. Looking at our sample of the U.S. online population, just slightly a more tech-savvy population, we've got a 54% penetration rate of U.S. adults who own a smartphone. So again, nearly 50% penetration for a technology that is about 10 years old. I think the BlackBerry was introduced in 2002, 10 years ago. So crazy amount of penetration in a very short period of time. What we see here on our graph on the right-hand side, the smartphone ownership by age, is what I call a professional distribution. So in theory, I think that intuitively we would all expect there to be the same stepwise progression downward of penetration as we get into the older age demographics, but that's not the case for several areas as it relates to smartphone usage and penetration of different media on the phone. So what this means is that for 18 to 29, we actually have less of a penetration than we do for that professional segment of 30 to 39. So part of this is because that there is a large ownership of smartphones for people for their job. So in their profession, their company buys them a smartphone or they have access for a smartphone for their job. And because of that, that's why we're seeing the peak in that 30 to 39 age group. All right, we are going to have our first poll here. The question is, and this is the same question that we asked in the DonorGraphics survey, do you own a tablet PC such as an Apple iPad or a Samsung Galaxy? And I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes to make sure that you can see that poll and have time to respond.
Okay. Got just about everybody there.
All right. Fantastic. So let's go over some stats that we see from the study. Overall, 16% of U.S. online adults do own a tablet PC. The ownership doesn't vary as much as you would think by age. I was actually rather surprised at this to see that, again, we do see a bit of that professional curve where we see those demographics in the 30 to 39 category as having the highest penetration, but I was rather surprised that the 18 to 29 weren't a little bit higher, and I was also surprised to see that those in the older age demographics were very much akin to the younger penetration rates. One of the most surprising, or perhaps actually it seems fairly intuitive once you see it, is this next distribution we'll be looking at, which is tablet PC ownership by income. This is, of course, a highly discretionary purchase. Tablets, by and large, tend to be an add-on to a already networked household. And so this is it's not a primary PC usage, it's an add-on, it's the convenience factor, and it's definitely discretionary, as we can see with the increase in penetration as we get in these higher income brackets that you see on the x-axis there. And Al, I'm going to turn it over to you to see what we can say about our online poll and tablet PC penetration.
All right, our results. Do you own a tablet PC such as an Apple iPod or Samsung Galaxy? We had 25% of our attendees said yes, and 75% of our attendees said no. Looks like 75% of our attendees know what will be on their Christmas list this year.
Lovely. Exactly. And as expected, we do have a higher penetration rate for the tablet PCs on this call of professional fundraisers than we do in the general population, just because we are dealing with a very different population mix. And just as note, the same correlation that we see here for income, we also see for education, because there is obviously a correlation between income and higher education. So we can therefore interpolate that we are a very educated group here. All right. Let's look at some digital landscape implications of the items that we just talked about. So digital divide differences. As we mentioned, there are gaps that are narrowing among the different age demographics, such as for social media and Facebook usage. It's definitely still prevalent in areas that we talked about, such as text messaging on mobile phones. There's definitely a large difference in the number of texts that some of the younger populations give and get as opposed to the older populations, and it's nearly non-existent for those 65 and older. Email's use, as we talked about, is shifting. It definitely, I can't stress enough that even though the ROI of email is trending downward over time, and I think the golden age of email marketing really peaked more in the 2007 timeframe, especially as it relates to commercial email. But email still has the highest ROI among any direct marketing channel, according to the DMA. And even though it is trending downward, it is head and shoulders above other channels. So I do think it's very important to still leverage and optimize a great email program within your fundraising program. It also acts as a kind of a central crux for your opt-in communication, so that it helps other channels like mobile and social media, because it's using the same sort of opt-in format, the same sort of content and engagement. Last bullet there, younger demos do tend to be bellwethers for digital adoption in older age groups. So we can look in the digital space at what the younger crowds are doing, and we can basically gauge the adoption curve in some of these older demographics over time. And it's not necessarily a long period over time. It the adoption rate varies based on the application. So for instance, social networking really took off quickly among older age demographics. It remains to be seen whether or not we're still going to see that see the same adoption rates take off for text messaging on the mobile. In any case, the digital divide is definitely shrinking across these demographics, and I think that that really speaks to the need to have the integrated marketing approach. And a lot has been talked about by integrated, but we're going to look at some specific considerations for it here. Namely, digital convergence. Digital convergence is a big aspect for integrated marketing simply because we have increased mobility thanks to mobile devices, including our iPads and our smartphones that you see on the right-hand side top there. So we're getting that increased level of mobility, but we're still absorbing a lot of the content in just new and different ways. So we still have the same access to content, but it is on a most likely more suited to a mobile device, which has big implications for marketers. Here's a good illustration of this. So this pie chart here is looking at time spent on opt-in or permission email by device. So we're looking at people who receive opt-in email, and they also have a smartphone. And we've asked them what percentage of the time they spend on their opt-in email by device. So we found that nearly 20% of their time with permission email is spent on their phone or their tablet PC. And what this means for marketers and fundraisers are on the right-hand side there, that we need to make sure that email content is rendering correctly, the creative looks good, the landing page has mobile functionality. We want to ensure that we can complete that call to action easily using a smartphone or a tablet, and that it doesn't error out on us, it's not microscripted. The constituent usability is going to be really key for that digital convergence and adoption. And I think a part of this is a mobile website functionality audit. How smartphone friendly is your website? Is it easy to take care of a task? Is it easy to donate online? Which we'll talk about in a little bit as well as it relates to preferred channels for donation. I think it's really important that we make it as easy as possible for not only these younger groups who are more wired and online, but also just to kind of pull some of our older age demographics to this new media. Okay, now we're going to switch views and focus on the portion of the U.S. online population who are active donors across any channel, online or offline. So we've got our moniker up here, our little icon of U.S. donors. And again, those are online U.S. adults ages 18 and older who have given a donation to a charitable organization in the last 12 months. And we've got our second poll here. We're going to ask another quick poll of, in general, what your preferred method of communicating with your friends are. So I realize that this question depends on the context of the communication, and in general, we're going to ask you which of the 5 categories is your go-to method outside, of course, of in-person communication. All right. We're going to look at the results of that question for those ages 18 to 29. You will notice that we've got a couple extra categories here that were present in our survey that are not on the poll simply because of technical limitations, but it'll probably make it a little quicker of a poll for you guys to go through. So looking at preferred communication method with friends. This is of U.S. donors. So ages 18 to 29, no surprise here, text messaging is preferred by and large. Telephone is second at 16% of preference. And then we've got social network followed by email. So what we're going to do is I'm going to advance the screens through the different age groups and decades so that we can get an understanding of how this communication mix changes as our population ages. Looking at the 30 to 39 group, you can see a tie between text messaging and telephone, email bringing up to the third. As we progress into 40 to 49, a big shift happens. Telephone is first, email is second, text messaging is third. This is a trend that just continues as we get into older ages. So 53% of those 50 to 59, or 50 to 64, and then of those ages 65 and older, a whopping 58% prefer the telephone, and about a third prefer email. So huge differences in how people prefer to communicate with their friends by age. And Al, do we have some poll results?
We do, Stacy. In general, when you're not face-to-face, what is your preferred method of communicating with your friends? Actually, 0% said mail. My mom would be very disappointed. She still sends those cards. 19% said email. 16% said social networks such as Facebook and Twitter. 20% said telephone, and 45% said text message on mobile phone.
Nice. I also happen to fall in that 45% who prefer text messaging for those quick updates.
My option wasn't on here. I prefer not to communicate with my friends, but that wasn't an option.
You obviously, being a born entertainer, you need that personal communication.
There you go.
All right. So thank you, Al, for reviewing those poll results. The communication methods that are preferred with friends, I think it's really important to understand how these age demographics are using communication in their personal lives, because we need to understand how that relates to nonprofit communications. So how should we be communicating with our donors and our prospects? Interestingly enough, opposite. So all the opinions that we've been formulating about some of these age demographics, such as younger demographics do not engage with email, that all kind of gets flipped on its head when we ask the question of how donors prefer their ideal media mix, what that ideal media mix looks like from nonprofits they support or have an interest in. So really interesting changes here. There's a lot of information on this slide, so before I go into detail, I'm just going to make it a little bit easier on us. Since telephone is definitely not a preferred communication, same with text messaging, we're going to just X those out to make it a little bit easier to see the big picture here. So looking at preferred communication mix with nonprofits by age, so we gave them 6 different categories of what their ideal media mix looked like, and they were able to allocate a percentage that equaled 100% across these categories. And this is what we found when we looked at it by age. You can see that those younger generations, as noted by the lighter coloration of bars, they actually have a higher instance of receiving email from nonprofits. Completely flipped on the mail side, you can see that those darker bars, including the black bar, which represents a 65 and older crowd, 64% of them actually prefer mail as the biggest component in their media mix from nonprofits that they are interested in. So really big differences here. Social network in the middle there, no surprise, definitely large correlation and pretty palpable for that younger age demographic of 18 to 29. That represents the biggest difference there, that 13% prefer to be spoken to from their nonprofits of interest from a social network, representing 13% of that overall communication mix. So let's compare that preferred mix of communications from nonprofits of interest to how they currently hear from organizations. So on the left-hand side is the current, and on the right-hand side is the preferred mix. You can see mail, which is represented in red here, lining up quite closely in both views. Email is shown in blue, and you can see that it's underrepresented. Social media is fairly well aligned there in green, actually nearly perfectly aligned. And then telephone in orange is overrepresented in the current state compared to preferred. So let's look at this a little bit differently, because I think it's going to be a little bit easier to see what the point of this chart is. We're going to take these same percentages from our two pie charts that we just saw, and we're going to calculate a simple index of current versus preferred for each category. An index score of 100 means that the current communications are aligned with the preferences perfectly. Opportunities are shown with an index score of less than 100, and the overly saturated channels have a score substantially over 100. We can see that social media and mail are both perfectly aligned with preferred communication, as they're right there at that 100 mark. And there's definitely an opportunity for, as it relates to email. And I think that there's a clear message that telemarketing is overrepresented in the current media mix, and we'll talk about that in just a second. A few observations in general on this chart. These index scores are fairly consistent across age groups. So for one, that might be kind of interesting considering all the age differences that we've been reviewing so far. But if we keep in mind that these demographics are actually seeking out some of their preferred channels on their own, such as if they want more emails, they're going to opt in to your email program. If they're interested in text as a preferred format, they're going to have a higher instance of opting into text message programs, as well as liking you on your organization on Facebook or following you on Twitter, that sort of thing, as it relates to the first three categories on the left-hand side. Second observation is that telephone as a channel, as we can see here in that overly saturated view, that probably has a lot to do with telephone as a channel, and telemarketing can be more disruptive or invasive, but it also, and perhaps maybe because of this, it also performs well for certain donor segments. So perhaps that's a reason why it's, although it does tend to be more invasive from a constituent perspective, we know that for certain segments it really performs well. So, insights into our findings that we just reviewed. I think that optimizing email programs is still key. I think it's important to continue to develop that engaging content and continue to develop targeted contact strategies within an email program. And then as it relates to testing, I think that the insights that we're seeing here are incredibly insightful, but I think that they also warrant additional testing to balance preference of donors with performance. So what is the right media mix for balancing preference across age demographics with performance? Because we do know that phone as a channel works very, very well and successfully for fundraising across certain segments, such as lapsed reactivation. We've seen some really good results with that. So I think it's important to take donor preference and balance it with those channels that we know perform well and continue to test within these demographics. All right, we're going to be looking at preferred giving and acknowledgement channels. Again, we are looking at U.S. donors, or those who have given a gift to a nonprofit organization in the last 12 months. Looking at how donors prefer to give. And again, this is an online sample, so those who are online, who have given a gift through any channel, not just online. We can see that it's split in terms of website and mail are tied for preferred method of giving. 34% prefer just to go to an organization's website to give, and about a third prefer by mail. 13% prefer going to a fundraising event and giving there. 7% in orange there prefer automatic donations. Very small percent at a 1.3% prefer by phone. And a small but importantly growing percentage do prefer to give via text message or SMS. And then we've got, of course, the other category at 11%, bringing up the rear. And again, when we dig deeper into these numbers, we see some large differences by age. This is probably the biggest slide of differences that we've seen here today, looking at the differences in how donors prefer to give by age. You can see that the younger donors, as represented in the lighter color bars, prefer to give on the website, not surprisingly. And progressively, as age increases, the propensity to want to give via mail increases via the same factor. So, and especially for those 65 and older, just have an overwhelming preference to give by mail. So let's look at some more implications of the preferred methods of giving. I think that it's important to understand if you're, and to test and audit whether your website is optimized for easy giving. It's a kind of very telling metric to understand how many clicks are required from start to finish to do a donation, either online and also on your mobile device, such as a phone or a tablet. I think that, as you've seen here, targeting is a very large implication, even if it's just by age and gender. And even if you're not using a one-to-one targeting strategy, even if you're using your general donor profile, that which you know or that which you've studied as a guideline for that communication strategy, I think it's really important to leverage those sorts of insights. And again, some of those are females having a higher satisfaction with SMS or text message programs, and digital preferences for targeting younger audiences and offline for older. And as our fundraising programs mature, we definitely are taking more of an integrated view on that, and I think it's very important to not only target appropriately by age, but also, again, to kind of pull and cull that digital engagement. All right, I believe this is our last slide here. Looking at donation acknowledgments as kind of a follow-up from preferred method of giving. We wanted to understand how the donors preferred to be acknowledged and whether they needed to be acknowledged. You can see here in yellow on that upper left pie slice that 22% said that they didn't need their donations acknowledged. But for the remainder, we saw that related to the donation method was preferred by 22%. You can see that in the red burgundy. By mail was 28% to have that physical receipt. Email was, again, split between mail and email is prevalent again. And then by phone, very, very little, other, very, very little. So 72% of the time, donors estimated they did receive an acknowledgement. So I think there's a big opportunity there to make sure that we are always acknowledging and engaging our donors at the same time in doing so. And also, I think that there's an additional insight here of maybe there is a kind of a guideline that we can use for donation acknowledgments for those higher donations. Of course, I think it's very intuitive and it makes a lot of sense from a cultivation perspective, but we just wanted to look at that 22% a little more who said that they didn't receive acknowledgement or they didn't require an acknowledgement. And sure enough, when we look at the average annual giving for everyone that said that they would prefer their donation acknowledged, they had an average annual giving of $654, and that compared to a substantially lower giving of $472 for those donors who said that they did not require their donations to be acknowledged. So I think that fundraisers are definitely prioritizing well with the strategy of giving preference to those higher donations. It just obviously makes sense logically from a cultivation perspective, but I think that this information as it relates to the preferred acknowledgement method is interesting in that it mirrors how they prefer to give. So using the same channel for acknowledgments as the donors are using to give is definitely something that this research supports. All right. So now, Al, we're going to turn it over for questions, I believe.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you so much for sharing these insights into the current donor digital landscape. We do have a couple of questions, if you've got just a minute. Lori, the first question that came in, we don't currently track the age of our donors in our database. What's the best way to collect that data?
Okay. Good question. I think there's a couple different approaches that we can do here, and those different approaches are going to be based on what your budget looks like, what your timing looks like, and how much of an ability that your program has to then target these insights in the back end. So you don't want to spend so much time storing and collecting these data points if you're not going to use them. I think that you could do an age append using name and address matching, or alternatively, I think it makes a lot of sense to do a kind of an easier, quicker, cheaper method of doing donor profiling to understand the composition of your donor mix, and then you can craft your strategy from that overall viewpoint. I think that as a crawl, walk, run perspective, I think that that's definitely the way to go. And even if it's not an official profile, I think that you all know your donors best, and you know the relative composition, if they skew older or younger, online, off. I mean, every fundraiser has a lot of insight into that, and I think that an official donor profile can just kind of help clarify that to, again, help that contact strategy be developed and targeted at least a global level.
Great. Another question. Would you recommend targeting by demographics like age or collecting contact preferences from donors? Sorry, do you need me to read that again?
Please.
Would you recommend targeting by demographics like age or collecting contact preferences from donors?
Okay. I think that ultimately the holy grail is to get actual donor preferences, but it is hard to do that for more than a small percentage of your donor base or your prospect base. So in my experience commercially, which is where contact preference centers are more widely used, is that only 5 to 10% of those consumers will actually fill out any information that you give them, either online or offline, in terms of contact preferencing. So that's the downside. The upside is that the engagement tends to be 2 to 3 times what it is for those who do not fill out their contact preferences, basically, either online or offline. So I think that if you have that targeted information, absolutely use it. The goal is about that one-to-one communication. But if in the lack of that, or if you lack the budget for developing a content preference system or a mechanism, I think that targeting by age and gender, as we've seen, but primarily age, goes a long way in establishing that, that ideal communication mix.
Great. We've had several people ask about downloading your presentation, and I just want to say that we will post a recording of this presentation along with the slides on Grizzard.com, and we'll also email the link to you within just a few days. Also, I'd like to ask, if you don't mind, you will receive a survey immediately following this presentation. It's a brief survey. If you don't mind just taking just a moment to fill that out for us, we'd really appreciate it. That is all our time for now. I hope everyone has found the study results enlightening, and Lori, if all of our attendees were not muted, I'm sure they'd be giving you a big round of applause. I know we've covered a lot, and if you have additional questions, please feel free to contact us at the email or phone number on your screen, or contact Lori directly. Once again, want to thank everyone for your time, and please check your email for invitations regarding upcoming Grizzard webinars. Our next is scheduled for the end of June. You'll be receiving information on it next month. Have a great day.
Thank you.